Welcome to the 25th anniversary of the London Shipping Law Centre.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage the founder and chairman of the London Shipping Law Centre and practising arbitrator, Dr. Alika Shepherd.
Friends, colleagues, and special guests, thank you. Thank you indeed for joining us to celebrate the 25 years of the London Shipping Law Centre. 25 years. As many of you may not know how it all started, let me tell you a short story. Well, after 14 years of my shipping practice in the City of London, I found myself at UCL, the Faculty of Laws, to teach and direct the shipping law courses. At first, it felt as if I was in a different planet, walking through the corridors, the dark corridors of Bentham House. All doors were closed. There was dead silence. Academics were seriously working. There was no waste of time or aimless talk. So I was lonely, really, and I missed my world of shipping in the city. So I had to create something exciting. My thinking at the time was to establish a club and invite maritime professionals to exchange ideas, knowledge, over a common interest, perhaps over a glass of scotch. But that was not enough, and I don't mean the scotch. I realized that what this great city was lacking was a synergy between the various maritime professionals. And I thought it would be very exciting if I was able to bring the industry sectors, the legal profession, and academia together. But how? These people, I thought, were in competition with each other. They wouldn't come together easily. So I needed a magic wand. Well, yes, so that magic wand had to be sharing knowledge, forging bonds, and promoting the maritime and legal strengths of London. And that raw idea became the impetus for the creation of the LSLC. The late Lord Mustill was the first to back it. So were leading maritime lawyers and industry figures, many of you here, who formed our first steering committee. And we inaugurated the centre at the House of Lords in 1997. Many of you here were there. The rest is history. But it has involved hard work and voluntary effort. So it is relevant, I think, to quote what J.F. Kennedy said in 1962 before the Apollo launch to the moon. We choose to go to the moon not because that would be easy, but because it will be hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one we are unwilling to postpone and one which we intend to win. Well, that quote encapsulates the force behind the beginnings and the achievements of the LSLC. And indeed, the LSLC has been or has served to organize and measure the best of our creative energies and skills. During the last 25 years, with the help of its supporters and volunteers, the Centre has attained huge goals, and you are all well aware of that. It is not just the learning, which is unrivaled, it is also the cohesion of our community. All of us, including our judiciary, who are honored to be here tonight, have enjoyed being involved. In fact, proud to be involved. We have learned from each other. We have nurtured the Centre together. We feel part of its purpose. And that's the beauty of it. We do not earn money, but we earn something more valuable: togetherness and the promotion of our city. And we're not an organization of chaps for chaps. We're supporting those who would not otherwise have an opportunity to show what they can do. And that's of huge importance. The Centre is not just London's baby, it is the baby of our industry. And I'm so pleased to see so many industry people here tonight. It has an international reach. As the education we deliver spreads beyond the seminar theatres, so does the reputation of London's and the UK's maritime professionals. Well, now that my purpose is complete, I put my trust into the young maritime professionals, and I know they will not fail. They have already reached out. Thanks to the chairman of the YMP, Ian Woods, and to the chairman-elect, Francesca Cappa, they have formed alliances with the young Singaporean and Italian professionals. Next will be the Greeks. I congratulate them, and I have this message for you all young people. Dare to be bold. Imagine big goals and carry them out with passion. That's the magic, passion. Because the LSLC is here for the long haul, and its standards must be kept as high as they have ever been. Thank you all for sharing this with us tonight.
Over those 25 years, there can scarcely have been a maritime subject that has not been covered in the forum's seminars, special events, and debates. We have been fortunate to have the support of our judges, from the Commercial Court up to the Supreme Court, and of leading industry luminaries who chair most of our events. Of course, this celebration could not have taken place without the general support of our sponsors. HFW, our platinum sponsor. Quadrant Chambers and Essex Court Chambers, our silver sponsors. 36 Stone Chambers and Novus, our bronze sponsors. All About Shipping and elaborate communications, our media supporters. And this is the legacy of 25 years. A voyage led by our captain, the founder of the LSLC, Dr. Aleka Shepherd. Educational in aim, clear-sighted in spotting what matters to the industry, far-reaching in bringing together experts from across the industry and those who want to know more. Shipping, commercial, legal, financial, safety and security, channels navigated to the most searching standards. The Forum's Education and Events Committee carefully selects the topics with an eye to the topical and the challenging. And the journey continues.
My lords, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage the Right Honourable, the Lord Thomas of Cumgeath.
My lords, or should I say my lord, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is headed Reflections, and I have 4. The first is to say what a privilege it is for us all to be here to celebrate the great achievement of this centre. Now, you all have, either on the slide here or in your programmes, an exhaustive catalogue of the achievements. And like all judges who have the opportunity of reading a skeleton argument, but no, not always avail themselves of it, I am sure you will have looked at it. But may I just highlight 3 points. First of all, the enormous success of the centre in what it has done over the years has been so varied. It has made a great contribution to identifying reform where that's necessary, and to bringing government to understand, if that's possible, the ways of the shipping industry. But I think of the third, and possibly the greatest achievement, is what it is doing for the young. It is always, I think, the task of an old man to speak about the young, whether that is because he then thinks back to his early days, I know not. But certainly when I came to become a shipping lawyer a number of years ago, we had the advantage of being in a relatively small community. You could then learn from people. All the shipping law I ever learnt was deviling, which was a practice carried out in those times for the silks in my chambers, and particularly Michael Mustill, but also having the opportunity of going and seeing what shipping was like. I had no head for heights, and one of the terrifying experiences of my life was climbing down into a tank of a ULCC. You don't forget that experience. And therefore what I think is being done in the centre, which is encouraging the young, giving them the experience of as much as possible, is an enormous achievement. So that's my first reflection. My second can be briefly expressed, and that is the enormous debt of gratitude we owe to Aleka. It has been I think no word can describe it. Fantastic, wonderful, outstanding, exceptional. But it has been an enormous achievement. She's had to bring together lawyers, academics, people in the shipping industry, government, international organizations, and non-governmental organizations, and has moulded this centre to be a force for enormous achievement and to help the position of London. We cannot thank her enough. And I shall come at the end to say I want to encourage her to go on for as long as possible. I know I don't get a very good nod of approval on that, but I think we all have seen her achievement and hope that she will carry on. But a good centre also needs an excellent manager, and I wanted also to thank Gerald Matthews for what he has done in organising it. My third reflection relates to what has been the key to this success. And I probably could answer that in one sentence. Alaka. That's it. But she would not allow me to get away with that, I'm quite sure. And so I've tried to think what has been behind, what are the principles that have been behind her success? And I think there are 5. First, ensuring those who seek to apply or develop the law relating to shipping understand the business of shipping. It's so important to appreciate across almost any area of the law that it cannot be developed sensibly unless those who develop the law understand the business. And that has been, I think, the first key principle. Secondly, I think she's seen that common lawyers have the ability to capitalize on the ideas of others, develop them and make them practicable. Sometimes politicians claim that the common law is this wonderful creation and it's all English to the core. I can say that as a Welshman, I think without fear of contradiction. But it's not true, because the great genius, and this is what is also a feature of this centre, is that it looks across the jurisdictions and sees, yes, this is a good idea, like English law has always done, but makes it practicable and makes certain that the law that we have in this country leads elsewhere. Third, I think, and this is of paramount importance, has been the success in making sure that those who decide disputes, and as importantly, those who argue the case on either side or on 3 sides that go to making up the decision, understand the way in which this will affect the business of shipping, and that the law is therefore developed in a very and highly practical sense. I don't think we can underestimate the difficulty of that task. Some years ago, if one goes back to the early 1970s, Lord Justice Roskill was able to say of the decision of the AILO, which had been decided about 10 years before, he observed the following. He said, "It is widely known that it was not a popular decision either in St. Mary Axe or the Temple. It is also widely known that its application has from time to time caused difficulties not only to brokers and umpires, but also to judges." I don't think any judge these days would actually put that in quite such a distinct contrast. But what is important about his observation is that at those times, because the community was small, because people spoke in a way it would be impossible to do these days, those who argued cases and those who decided them, whether as arbitrators or as judges, had a real feeling of what was going on. And I think it's very striking in the recent Halliburton and Chubb case, how things have changed, that various arbitration associations have decided they needed to say something to inform those who are making decisions. And so I think the third key to the success has been the education, making certain people stay up to date. And it is quite impossible to stop an arbitrator and a judge from making a mistake. These will always happen. But I think that what we must do, and what I hope the Centre will do for the future, is really to take a very persuasive line and say, yes, you got it wrong. That is something that I think that a centre like this does, and does well. And fourthly, I think we've tended to proceed in the law these days in trying to make it coherent, in the sense that although most lawyers are specialists, it fits in with the rest of the development of the law. And fifthly and finally on this point, it's bringing international learning together. It's now over some 50 years since the American maritime arbitrators have been publishing their decisions. And you just have to think how much law that has created. There are then cases in jurisdictions such as Singapore and other developing areas which are adding to the huge amount of law. You then have huge academic contributions. I think it would have been quite impossible to conceive at the time this centre was founded in 1994, quite of the volume of academic work that now is, encouraged, of course, by the fact that you have as an academic to publish or you don't get a good rating for your university. And then there is the problem of trying to understand foreign concepts. And can I take good faith as an example? One of the things I learnt in one of the earlier shipping cases I did was how important it is to understand foreign concepts. We had an expert who came up with a whole host of arguments as why we must be right. But he'd also written a book in which he had put in that resort to the doctrine of good faith was the resort of a pleader in distress. The expert on the other side managed to demolish every point he made, and he said to us, just as we were about to go into court, we've got to run good faith. You can imagine that the case settled almost instantaneously. And I wanted to mention that because one of the difficulties with English becoming the lingua franca of the shipping industry is that we tend to look at the word good faith in other systems and think it means what we think it means. And a centre like this, and I think this is one of its contributions, in looking across the world, we'll see that that is fallacious, that it means different things and has different functions in different legal systems. Now, I've added those 5 principles, but I want to return to Annika, because it is the moulding of ideas such as that, and bringing them together, bringing all these people together, has been a huge achievement for which each and every one of us is grateful, enormously grateful, far more than I can say. But what of the future? Things are going to change. The period from 1994 to date, the 25 years we celebrate tonight, has been a term of an enormous change. If you think back, or I hope everyone here can think back to the beginning or the middle stage of their professional lives, or what it was like 25 years ago, things have changed. But what I think is now apparent is things will change much more rapidly. And I just wanted to take 2 examples of issues we're going to have to confront. The first is the effect of digitalization. There is no doubt it is having a dramatic effect on the way disputes are resolved. I think we will probably, within the very near future, go away from the paper file to arbitrations and to court to ensure that we do everything with the electronic file. Secondly, I think the era of video evidence is coming, Having spent a lot of the past year dealing with evidence over a video link, I see nothing wrong with it. And we're going to go to distance hearings. But we've got to be very careful what we do, because we must not dehumanize the law. One of the great benefits of being here tonight, and it's been wonderful to see everyone getting up and chatting, is that this is a community. And as we move forward to court procedures that will be more remote, we must keep the community, and the centre is a community. But we've also got other things to think about in digitalisation. I myself think that we've got to be very careful about getting excited about artificial intelligence. The issues in relation to the blockchain and self-executing contracts have shown that people can get very excited, but nothing much happens. But there is one area that I do think we've got to look in shipping because it is a matter of tremendous importance, and that is the way data is used and the value of data. So that's one area I want to take for the future. And the second area I want to take is the leadership of London. Now, London has done very, very, very well. It is the leader, but I don't think the next 25 years or the next 50 years will see it as easy as it has been in the last 25 years. But I believe that London can maintain its leadership, but it does require a number of changes. First, it seems to me that we've got to recognise the fact that inevitably other nations will want cases decided in jurisdictions that are not Western. But I don't think we should be frightened of that. The success of the English legal profession and English advocates across the world has been quite outstanding. And if we show that we respect the decisions in the way in which I've described, but develop our law based on them and maintain leadership, I do not think we should worry. The second thing that London has, which is of enormous importance, and this goes to the personal relationship in a centre such as this, is a firm belief in very strong ethical standards. That is the hallmark of the profession. It was interesting that Chief Justice Menon of Singapore, when looking at one of the sort of changes he felt ought to be made to legal education, in a lecture he gave this time last year, was to instill into people ethical principles. We are taking a lead in this country in trying to instill ethics into bankers. You may think that's a wholly impossible task, but we have a strong ethical base, and it is the ethical standards of our profession and our arbitrators and our judges, which is absolutely at the cutting edge and is something that we must foster through institutions such as this. And I think thirdly, we must make certain that we look on what happens in England. I use the word England deliberately because it's a delusion to think that this is anything other than essentially London or English-centric. That there is a really important relationship to be fostered between the courts and arbitration. We have got to make certain we get the relationship right, and we have to confront, but I'm not going into any more detail about this, what we do about developing principles in arbitrations. This is an issue that we have to confront, and it seems to me of great importance. But of paramount importance is leadership. And I want now to return to the centre, because what the essence of this centre is a centre of leadership, of showing that we can lead in the law. And I'm not talking about management, I'm not talking about administration. What I'm talking about is leadership in ideas and in the development of the law. And to my mind, as long as we can keep a body like this going, looking at what is happening elsewhere, using the genius of the English common law to take ideas and make them practicable, London has a great future. but it will be one that will need fighting for, and fight we must. And therefore, what I'd like to do is to propose a toast to the London Shipping Law Centre, to its past very substantial achievements under the leadership of Aleka, and, as importantly, to its successful future. The London Shipping Law Centre. It will be upstanding. We'll drink its health.
My lords, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage Matthäus Loss.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, very difficult to follow on that wonderful discourse from Lord Thomas. I'm afraid I'm not as eloquent, and I will be reading most of what I have to say this evening. I hope it will not bore you, and I will try to be brief because it's been an excellent dinner, and we don't want the digestive tract to be disturbed. First of all, I'd just like to add my own 2 words of praise for Aleka Shepherd's inspired creation of the Centre, and more particularly her tireless efforts in ensuring that it remained and remains relevant by dealing with so many of the topics which have surrounded the shipping industry, and for sustaining these efforts over an unbelievable period of 25 years. Few of us can imagine what an effort this has taken, and I feel one of my tasks this evening will be to try to illustrate some of the benefits this creation has provided for a vast number of individuals who've participated in these seminars, mock trials, debates, and monthly events, which over time have numbered, as we've seen, more than 300 during this period. And we'll come back to that in a few moments. At the same time, I would also like to thank the Council and Professor Shepherd for allowing me the privilege of addressing this evening's gathering. I'm very grateful for that. This has prompted me to wonder, why me? And it then occurred to me that I must be one of the few remaining relics who can claim to have been a student of Cad's, as we used to call him, while he was still only a senior lecturer. He wasn't even a professor yet. And that's before he became the illustrious Professor Cadwallader. There are still a few of our endangered species around, and I'm sure the Centre wished to provide and produce one of the last surviving examples. I think by now we are all familiar with the main objectives of the Shipping Law Centre, which do not cover only legal issues, but are interspersed with a great deal of commercial knowledge as well. What I would like to try to do is take a brief look at what notable changes have taken place during the past 25 years in the shipping industry, to see how the Centre has kept up with these in more public presentations by identifying, examining, and analyzing their effect in a practical way. The shipping industry is certainly dynamic and can be affected by so many external influences. It's therefore not surprising that these numerous influences have produced differing results and consequences. The first and most obvious great change has been brought about through what we loosely refer to as globalization. This has enormously affected not only world trade, but world relations between continents and countries. Since the fall of the Iron Curtain and the entry of China into the commercial world, not only has trade expanded exponentially, but a number of other consequences stemming either directly or indirectly from this expansion have followed suit in the maritime world. Some of these may have been anticipated, others have just occurred because it was time for them to happen. I will list just a few extraordinary practical changes which have occurred during this period, and we'll go on to look at how the Center has raised awareness of the most important ones, and in certain instances even influenced their development. Outside our sphere of immediate interest, the cost of both new and second-hand vessels has increased with inflation and gone well beyond. In tandem, ship financing has altered radically. In 1979, the financial institutions which were prepared to provide funding for ship purchases may have numbered around 400. By 1995, these had dwindled to around 200. Nowadays, there are probably no more than 40 banks prepared to risk their money on traditional shipping ventures. And in parallel, public stock market institutions soon became aware of the strong profits generated by more private traditional ship owners during the opening of the new frontiers, and they entered the fray through the proliferation of hitherto unknown IPOs, public offerings allowing stock market investors entirely ignorant of shipping in any of its forms to share in part of the action through publicly traded shipping companies. Other changes: gas carriers, once regarded as excessive risks, they now abound. That's where a lot of the money is. Container ships replaced to a great extent general cargo tween-deckers and other such vessels, and the proliferation of newly introduced acronyms standing for, I think I've leapt a page which has made me make no sense. Let's try and recover the fumble. I was talking about container ships, and I was saying that how these container ships used to pride themselves not only for their safety against pilfering and theft, but also for their speed of delivery. This element of speed, which once saw them sailing at speeds of up to 28 to 30 knots, soon succumbed to the greatly increased cost of fuel and settled back to the more moderate speeds of 14 to 16 knots. Traditional seafaring nations ceased to provide crews other than officers for vessels owned or operated by their compatriots. And ship owning became much less entrepreneurial, with many ship owners never having been to sea. Today, ship owning relies much more on the involvement of university-educated graduates, MBAs, Masters of Science within the management offices. The most obvious consequence of all this has been the perceived need to place some rein on the previous absolute freedom of the high seas as we knew it, and upon the freedom of the ship's operator to trade with few restrictions as he pleases, even if this may once have been safe and professionally sound. As is always the case, it's the lowest common denominator that initiates the action. This conveniently brings up the second, in my view, most significant change of the past 25 years, which in many respects flows directly from the other changes I've enumerated above. And that, of course, is regulation. The proliferation of newly introduced acronyms, which stand for newly introduced regulations, is in itself an indication of the number of new rules, requirements, and restrictions that have come into existence during this relatively short period. To name just but a few, we've got Open 90, Open 96, CSR, CRS, IMO 2020, STCW, and of course the king and queen of them all, ISM. ISM, that's a scary word for some people, or at least it used to be, which was introduced as late as 1993 and which transformed the industry completely. The International Safety Management Code came into being following the perceived failure of ships' owners and managers to adopt safety standards voluntarily, which, it was felt, had led to various notable casualties such as the Aegean Sea, the Brea, these are all now mythical, Herald of Free Enterprise, which in turn influenced the creation, introduction, and imposition of the non-voluntary ISM code. But let me come back to the subject we're dealing with. Having highlighted the very significant changes that occurred during the relatively brief period of time, how did the London Shipping Law Centre react, and what measures did it take to enlighten and educate the shipping community as far as, for example, ISM was concerned? It's here that I must award, Aleka, full marks to you and the Centre in managing to persuade no one better qualified to speak on this subject and explain ISM than the celebrated Lord Donaldson. The late Lord Donaldson, in my humble estimation, was at the time certainly the most interested and without a doubt the most qualified judge in maritime matters. He himself admitted that his preferred field of the legal profession was maritime law, even though at the time, I'm not sure he would have liked this, but he was better known outside the shipping realm as the first and, as it turned out, the only judge to head Edward Heath's short-lived yet significantly important industrial tribunal, which we may remember, some of us at least. But in the world of shipping, it was he who in 1994 transformed the attitude of government to safe shipping with his very comprehensive report entitled Safer Ships, Cleaner Seas. In the first inaugural Cadwallader lecture in March 1998, it was Lord Donaldson himself who spoke. It was he who went through in great detail the origins of safe navigating, due in part to the fact that the shipowner was himself frequently the ship's master and had a direct interest in keeping a safe ship. He described how, over time, classification societies came into being to regulate the construction of ships to a safe standard, how these were at times manipulated by the national government interests, how the freedom to choose which government should regulate the vessel began to be abused, how port state control provided another safeguard, and how all of these necessarily finally led to the initially, at least, strongly resisted ISM International Safety Management Code, which carried with it uniform safety management standards applicable to all shipping. This detailed analysis by the supremely qualified legal maritime justice of the time must probably stand out as the Centre's, I regard, finest coup, Aleka. It was a great coup to have him introduce that. It was timely and was presented by the most eloquent proponent of safe navigation and safe management at the time. With standardized regulation, there naturally arose the question of how countries would enforce these regulations across the greatly expanded globe. Inevitably, certain countries with strong influence at the IMO were less inclined to rapidly implement the code. The relatively newly formed European Union, however, with its newly acquired bite and its desire to show that it was whiter than white when it came to regulating what it perceived as renegade trades, such as shipping, with its rust buckets, and rust buckets was the phrase the European Union Commissioner Lallis used, the European Union decided that any monitoring or policing by the IMO, the United Nations body internationally responsible for this, was likely to be too slow in adopting the rules the European Union felt should be adopted swiftly and sought to go its own independent way. This stricter attitude understandably followed a number of high-profile oil pollution incidents, which the EU believed could not possibly have occurred had the vessels involved met the newly introduced double hull standards. Indeed, Commissioner Lallis indicated a very real intention within the EU to phase out single-hull tankers with effectively a notice period of only 2 years, whereas in the United States, where the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 was the model for the European following, the United States had allowed a 10-year phase-in period. So In Europe, we would have had 2 years. In the United States, they had 10. That's how keen they were to introduce this. In another landmark Cadwallader lecture, that of September 2000, European Commissioner Lallis outlined to the Centre in full the reasons the EU Commission believed it should proceed without delay, even if it meant regionally going it alone. Within European waters, where it felt it had every right to dictate the policy, even in advance of the IMO's timetable. These arguments were countered by an equally elegant and well-prepared representative from the shipping community, a great friend of mine, and I would term him probably, when it comes to arguing, the nuclear option, Epaminondas Emberikos, a very dynamic and articulate individual. With ample evidence, he explained how this would have a very negative impact on many elements of European shipping, and most importantly, would likely end up favoring Far Eastern interests at a time when such competition was becoming quite heated. The debate was polite but quite firm and intense, and the most useful part of it was that certain hitherto overlooked arguments were properly aired and explained in such a way that the Commissioner was able to report these back to colleagues in Brussels to reconsider the entire question of going it alone. And so began a series of debates in public under the auspices of the London Shipping Law Centre, under the banner of the Cadwallader Lectures that have continued to the present day and which have covered virtually all the thorny issues that have reared their head as far as the industry is concerned. Of particular note have been the October 2004 lecture introduced by Lord Steen and which captured firsthand the views of the IMO Secretary General Themios Mitropoulos, who started the debate relating to criminalization of seafarers following the detention of Captain Mangouras in Spain after the Prestige disaster and the jailing of the whole crew of the Tasman Spirit. Both of these acts received great publicity as these detentions were perceived in many quarters as a form of hostage-taking. In October 2008, the Cadwallader Lecture again debated the question of how to resolve a situation where equally applicable laws conflicted, and the question arose of which law should take precedence. 2 years later, in November 2010, politicians, commissioners, regulators, and ships operators all got together to examine the way forward. Again, the topic of discussion centered very much around the frustration expressed by European Commissioner Karamitsos that things under IMO were not moving fast enough. In all these debates, strong views were put forward, most vigorously by all sides, but what characterized the discussions in particular was the fact that at the end of each debate, there was a feeling that progress had been made, in that elements which may have previously escaped both sides came to the fore and allowed each debater to return to base with a better understanding of how remedies could be reached, or with the acceptance that the opposing argument may have merited further consideration. I feel I've already taken up too much time, but there's a further point I must return to, which I touched upon in my opening comments and which I ought to highlight. Apart from these Cadwallader lectures, the tireless efforts of the Centre have produced an endless number of seminars, workshops, mock trials, live debates, and lectures, which, as far as the legal profession is concerned, have given life and color to the subject for aspiring students, shipping lawyers, and maritime professionals, by providing an invaluable forum for showing what the many regulations signify, how they are implemented, and how they can affect the day-to-day life of the legal practitioner. The risk management events have been particularly useful and have helped P&I clubs set up their own loss prevention and risk management departments to advise their owners. I would dare to say that these gatherings have been the hallmark, resounding success for the Centre. The Cadwallader Lectures have been what we could call the icing on the cake, by bringing together real-life opposing interests to discuss in a very open manner issues that had hitherto been viewed as intractable, and then opening the door to compromise in a way that an exchange of letters or official representations may not have done. For this excellent achievement, I say to Aleka and all those who have put in the hard work, well done. Gerard, wherever you are, I must express a great word of thanks too for your unswerving loyalty and dedication behind the scene to the Centre and its success over all this period. I think very little acknowledgement is taken of the tremendous work he has put in, and I thought he deserves mentioning as well. In these lectures and over a relentless period of 25 years, the Centre has provided a debating platform that is far from academic and which, through its very existence, has served to provide an excellent forum for shaping not only opinions of ordinary individuals, but in many cases, the Centre has shaped the minds of those who ultimately decide on the measures to be adopted internationally for the shipping industry. Thank you all for your attention.
My lords, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage a leading industry figure and founding industry member of the London Shipping Law Centre, George Chevalierius.
Lords, ladies, gentlemen, being a romantic Greek, I find it difficult to actually address you just in a 2-minute, 3 minutes, which is my quota. There's no more lengthy speeches. But I just want to mention a few things which I think are vitally important this evening. First of all, I'd like to give a vote of thanks to Lord Thomas and Matthew Loss. A couple of comments about their presentations. Lord Thomas reminds me of the fact that we have to, since he went into the issue of digitalization, to quote Darwin, the one who succeeds in this world is not the strongest, is not the most intelligent, but it's the person who can adapt himself to the changes. I think that's the key feature to actually all of us here to addressing our future. Matthew, you also reminded me of a time when you were in the office in 1969, 1970, when we were toying with the idea of taking the course at University College, and we're toying with the idea how we're going to go about it and what we're going to do. You came from Canada. I had 3 or 4 professional qualifications, so I was trying to find a way of getting around the irregularity of taking a postgraduate diploma, not having a bachelor's degree. But as they say, or as Edward Land says, you never undertake a project in life unless it's manifestly important and virtually impossible. And because it was virtually impossible, that's why we had to go about doing it. My sincere thanks to the London Shipping Law Centre, to all the team who worked endless lives for so many years, for 25 years. Again, with reference to Joe Matthews, who sometimes had to tolerate my after-hours phone calls and my ways of trying to find what I call an imaginative way of resolving problems, which we always found of ourselves resolved. But at the end of the day, I think I can't really emphasize in more of a focal point my dear friend, my sister, Aleka Shepherd. Aleka's the person, I think, a lot has been said today about what Aleka has achieved, but what hasn't been said is the sacrifice she had to make in actually doing what she did for so many years. It's not very easy as you probably know, for a predominantly somewhat chauvinistic industry which existed years ago, for a lady of her caliber to achieve what she achieved and maintain her stamina, her enthusiasm, her zest, and above all, her childish enthusiasm, which I've always shared with her. Now, on that note, being, as I said, a romantic Greek, I want to offer my dear friend Aleka a small little gift on behalf of the Centre as an expression of our gratitude for what she's achieved and the fact that she's actually achieved the issue of having so many people in this room today who've actually shared the enthusiasm, the predicament, and what we've all been able to do for the next generation. As my beloved friend Nick Papadakis once said, that the country's strongest point is the strongest asset is the next generation. And what we're really here for is that we're not going to talk about what was achieved in the past, but we're trying to actually convey and pass on our enthusiasm, our zest for life, and I'll add to what Aleka mentioned about the passion. I've got 3 P's, but Aleka just mentioned the first passion. I've got 3. Perseverance, patience, and passion for the next generation. Aleka, I'd like to come up, if you can, please, to accept a small gift from the London Shipping Law Centre and all my colleagues.
Thank you. It's nice to have such good friends around.
No, on that
And all
note,
of you, thank you for appreciated the value of the centre. That's the most important. And the words of Lord Thomas and Matthews are very significant. They really speak to my heart. And as you know, I'm a very passionate person, so I'm grateful to your speeches and all of you who appreciated what is happening in London and what has happened in the last 25 years, from which we all have benefited. Now,
on that note, you stay with me, because now we both feel in a rather generous mood, and I'm going to call upon Matt Hammerford to come on upstage, because we're going to do a raffle for the Royal Navy Life Institute, for which the Shipping Centre, for all the sponsorship money they received this evening, we're giving 10% to the RNI, the Royal Lifeboats. On that note, and because you're always feeling now rather generous and you want to put your hands in your pockets, now we're going to start thinking about the idea of having a raffle. Before we'll have the raffle, but we're also going to make a contribution, each one voluntarily, whatever you want to go to the Royal National Life Institute. And to put my money where my mouth is, I'm going to start by putting £200 in the little kit we have here. The boot. Like I said, we have to use the boot rather than the hat, because the hat won't fit all the money which we're going to gather. See, otherwise, I was thinking about using the hat. But with the hat, it's too small to gather the money which we're going to gather this evening, so we're going to use the boot. On that boot, I'm putting in some bit of money, and I'm sure all of you are going to follow me in some stage or form. I'm putting in £200 as a gesture, and I hope each one of you will feel generous for something which, don't forget, the Royal Life Institute is basically the life boats. They save lives. They're one of the major contributions to shipping society. Okay, thank you.
Lords, ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests, I've been tasked with the very pleasurable duty of accepting this donation from the Centre. and I would like to take the opportunity to thank them on behalf of all of the people involved with Tower Station, Lifeboat Station, and particularly the exceptional men and women who give up their time to crew the boats and risk their lives to make our waters safer. I've been asked to do a very short talk about Tower Lifeboat Station, and I promise it lasts no more than 2 minutes. Tower Lifeboat Station, of course, part of the RNLI network of lifeboat stations. It is in fact the busiest lifeboat station in the UK. They are responsible for the 16-mile stretch of the Thames running from Barking Creek to Battersea. The Tower Lifeboat Station has 55 crew, and between them they manage to ensure that the station is ready and primed 24/7, 365 days a year. They have 3 E-class inshore lifeboats. And for those of you, like myself, before about 2 hours ago, who didn't know what they are, these are specifically designed lifeboats for inshore river work. They're fast, they're maneuverable on a very tight basis, and they can work in shallow waters. It's called the Tower Lifeboat Station because originally it was stationed by Tower Bridge. It's now relocated to Waterloo Pier, but they've decided to retain the original name. Now, as many of you will know, RNLI, and Tower Station is no exception, receives no government funding. So it's entirely reliant upon charitable donations. So gifts like these, events like these are very, very important and very appreciated. I said a minute. I'm going to finish with a quote. So the founder of the RNLI was a chap called Sir William Hillary. And Sir William Hillary, legend has it, actually conceived the idea of the RNLI while drinking in the then famous tavern, the London Tavern in Bishopsgate, long since demolished. So the City of London has always had a very important part of links with the RNLI. And that was back in 1826. Now I want to finish with a quote. All of us have a common purpose: to maintain and reinforce a safety culture and high quality in shipping service. For this purpose, our efforts must be joined. Now, these could have been the words of Sir William Hillary in 1824. However, they are not. They come from the speech given by the founding director of the London Shipping Law Centre, Dr. Rebecca Shepherd, at its inauguration at the House of Lords. Thank you to the Centre. Thank you to everyone that's contributing today for a very, very worthy cause. Thanks very much.